Today I played a bunch more of the game that shall not be named. Really enjoying it so far. Not going to say anything more on that. Jane and I just got back from biking around New York. Really nice time of the year to bike around. The first thing we did was to get Jane a new bike helmet, and then we headed over to the bookstore just to browse. I've never been surrounded by so many books while wearing a helmet before. Now I don't even care if they crash on me. I will stand tall through the resistance, through the book pummeling. Bookstores are the type of place that I like going, even if I have no intention of getting anything, just so I can see what's out there and add books to my future to-read list. The nice thing about books too is that since that form of media has been around for so long, if you go to a store that's not all new books and it's a mix of old and new, you have books through the years, and the different covers and jacket types are really cool. And it goes from like, they'll have a section from like with like these leather bound George Washington type books, and then everything up through the present and in between. And it's cool to see how packaging and marketing sort of changed. One of my all-time favorite authors is Bertrand Russell. So whenever I go to a bookstore, I like going to the philosophy section to just see which stuff by Bertrand Russell they may have on file. He has so many books, and most bookstores tend to have the same 3 or 5 over and over again, but that's totally fine. I like to check anyway. But this time they had something different, which was the autobiography of Bertrand Russell, and it had this really cool vintage blue trippy cover with his face, and there was this like blue pattern happening all around the rest of the cover. I was almost gonna get it, but then I realized, well, the first thing I realized was that I have a lot of books here that I haven't read yet, so I want to go through those first before I just keep hoarding more books. But the second thing, it was like a substantial book, and it was a 3-volume set. Now the guy did live to be almost 100, but I was like, ugh, 3 volumes. If I want to read this, I'm really gonna have to hoard books. All right, I'm not doing this. But the cover was really cool. And speaking of old books with cool covers, once I was looking for date ideas for something to do with Jane, and I saw that there was going to be an antique book fair happening in the city. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. We'll go there. Like, we all like books. We'll probably see something cool. And we get there, and the venue was really cool, and it was huge. And imagine when you're like in elementary school and they'd have those book fairs where you walk around with your parents and like get books to take home. It was exactly like that, except every book was like $40,000 minimum, and it was like signed first edition book from the 1800s. I was like, I'm glad we came, but this is a little bit, well, not a little bit. This is a lot out of our price range, so we're just going to be browsing. And the books were really cool, but it was kind of a letdown when I realized that like there really was nothing reasonable there. It was like super old rich people like browsing to get like a first edition signed copy of Winnie the Pooh or like Ernest Hemingway. There was actually a really good selection if you had the money for it and were looking to expand your classic book library. Like, one of the funniest things I saw while we were at that were 2 things. One was a first edition, like super pristine copy of On the Revolutions of Heavenly Spheres by Copernicus. And then the other one was, it was a first edition copy of Charles Darwin On the Origin of Species for $1 million. And I was like, man, if I had $1 million, I feel like this is going to go up. We should just get this. But obviously it's just a joke. We walked around. You don't need that much time to kind of see what's there. But then we noticed that there was a schedule of talks, and one of them was being given by a guy who owns an old or antique bookstore, and he's talking about grading and quality of books. So we're like, oh, all right, we'll go to that. And the guy was like really funny. I could imagine this guy in another life being a video game dealer, but like instead he got into old rare books. And he said something really interesting, which is that he was talking about signatures. And this like makes a lot of sense after he said it, but I had never thought of it this way. He said signing books only really became a thing in like probably the 1900s. And the guy explained that the most valuable books are when the author signs it and writes it like to some significant person in their life. So if it's like Satoru Iwata's book and he's like, to Reggie, looking back on all the good times from our years together, never would have launched the Wii without you. That's what you want when there's some known connection to the author. Then from there, you just want a blank signature, just the book signed plain, and then Lowest tier is if they write it out to some random person. And that's more common these days because there's all these book signings and they go like, hey, who do you want to make it out to? So if it's like from J.K. Rowling to Bob and Bob's like random, it's better to just have J.K. Rowling, not to like just plain. Now, the one exception he said is that there's obviously a whole world of forgeries and fakes. And a big part of his job is people trade stuff into his store and he has to basically figure out whether it's legitimate or a forgery. And he said the more writing there is, the easier to tell if it's fake or not. So even though in theory, if you knew the signature was valid, you'd rather have the author's plain signature than the autograph and like to Bob. But if the to Bob helps you tell that it's legitimate, and the one by its, that actually could be a leg up over something that's so plain you can't even tell if it's real or not. But the funny thing about it was that throughout the entire talk, no matter what he was talking about, he kept saying provenance. Provenance apparently means like every time a book changes hands, ideally that's recorded so you know all the previous owners, and that chain of previous ownership is called the provenance. And he kept saying provenance, and it was like so funny. I was trying not to laugh, and he was like, they came in with the book about John Updike, and the provenance was, and I was like, ugh! It was really cool talk, and I learned something about rare books that day.